As the current generations are struggling to bring rising global temperatures under control, their possible failures are going to be felt by future generations. Experts are saying that very young children are the ones who will later be hit by diseases triggered by the ongoing climate change and climate crisis. Stellenbosch University professor, it's Prof. Mark Tomlinson, making time for me this morning. Hello to you, Prof. Good to have you back on ENCA. So the report I see, it's going to affect children under the age of 5 as they get older. How worried should we be about this?
Well, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. I think we should all be very, very worried. We know that we're all going to carry a burden, but both now in the present and into the future, children, particularly young children, are going to carry the largest, carry the largest burden. So we know, for example, that if you think about an infant under a year, an age of a year, they're not able to control their environment. So, for example, to seek out a cool place if we're in the middle of a heat wave. We know that young children, part of their developing lungs, they breathe faster, they take in more air. So in situations where there's increased air pollution, they take in more of that pollution. Also, per unit, per body, they need more liquids and more food. And again, in situations of a lack of those, then they suffer greatly.
And let's not forget as well that yesterday was World Population Day, as well as we take a look, Prof, and tell me if I'm on the right track here, the increased number of people on the planet, which of course then results in increased emissions because of industry and everything else. So this is a man-made disaster, which seemingly a lot of people don't think is relevant. Others are complete denialists. But one thing is for certain, it's going to affect future generations. So just how much can we really do as a species to try and get on top of this?
Well, there are lots of things we can do, most of which we aren't. Many places are trying, and there's, as you know, there are lots of shifts to renewables and away from fossil fuels. But our obsession at some level, I suppose you could call it that, with increased growth, with consumerism, with buying a whole lot of things we don't need, is driving us into a massive crisis. And we can keep putting our heads into the sands like an ostrich, but it's not going to go away. And if you're living right now in Texas or in India with massive events, with people literally dying of heat, let alone all the other environmental disasters, we have a problem, and we're not, as a species, dealing with it. We caused this, we're not solving it.
I remember listening to a podcast just a couple of weeks ago, ironically enough, and I remember it something being called the Goldilocks zone or something like that. Also the reference to the frog in cold water being boiled slowly. But for the human race, it looks like in a couple of decades, we could be the frog chucked into water that's too hot too quickly, and we're not going to survive. Just help me understand what Goldilocks and the Goldilocks zone is.
Well, I think the two things are slightly different. The Goldilocks zone is this idea that all living species on Earth have a particular kind of niche in which we need certain nutrients, we need certain things to survive, and one of those is we need, and there's a range obviously, but there's a range of temperature that we thrive in. If that changes too fast and goes too high, basically we die. And that's what's starting to happen with various species, with fish boiling in parts of the ocean. I think there were parts of the Florida Keys yesterday where the seawater temperature was 36 degrees Celsius. So that's the Goldilocks zone. The idea of the frog, I think, is more that we're already the frog in the water. And it's cold, but it's starting to cook. And the frog, because it's a slow boil, they don't realize they're in the water that's starting to boil, and eventually they boil to death. They don't jump out of the water. And I think it's a very apt metaphor for us. We're not jumping out of the water, turning the stove off and fixing the problem.
In fact, we're the frog in the water that's actually turning the temperature up on the stove while we're sitting in the water as it's getting hotter as well. Prof, I'm curious to know, though, even if South Africa, just as I'm talking as a single country, we were to do everything we needed to try and get our little part of the world under control. We are still victims to globalization. Is there really anything that a standalone country can do on the international sphere when it comes to global warming? We're going to feel the effects even if we're 100% doing what we need to do to try and slow it down.
Totally. Look, I think you're right and wrong. I think that if only one country solves the problem, that's probably not going to be effective unless you maybe the United States or China, one of the big ones. But China is making massive strides in terms of solar and renewable. India is a really important country in terms of if they make a full transition to renewables rather than fossils, we have some hope. But if every country does as much as they're able, then we perhaps do stand a chance of staying below the 1.5 degrees increase. We're not going to go backwards very fast. There's no question about that. But what we're doing at the moment is what we're not doing is what we need to do is some serious damage limitation. And even at an individual level, there are things we can do, and we all need to be doing it because otherwise we're in real trouble.
Why are we so bad as nations, as a species, in reacting to this? Is it because we're not seeing it, it's not affecting enough of us at one time? We just don't seem to take it very seriously. We're all terrified when we watch those doomsday movies, and we all have these chats with our friends going, oh, imagine that was to happen. But we don't seem to take it very seriously. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I suppose there's something. I mean, we could have a 30-minute conversation about that, and you could have a panel on that, I suppose. I mean, I think it's partly to do with a kind of a living in the moment and in the short term, and we struggle to look deep down into the future, and while we're all worried and we're concerned about our children and our grandchildren, it's just enough removed from our daily experience to not act on it. If we all saw a tsunami on its way, and we knew that it was going to get here, we could see it, we could see the effects, and we knew it was going to be with us in a year. Unless we did certain things, we would probably act. But 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we're not very good at that.
No, we're not. Prof, as I say goodbye to you, just the last question, briefly, if you could. So who needs to be doing what in our country at the moment? I want to try and take this conversation forward with other people. Who am I talking to, and what do we want to hear from them?
Well, we need to listen to the people that have got, Nick Headley. They're people that have got very good solutions around renewables, about moving away from fossil fuels. We have to move away from that. It hasn't, we all can see it's not working in South Africa, fossil fuels. We need a different solution. We need political leaders that are not in the pockets of oil companies. We need to be kind of, pushing for that and listening to the people that have got solutions that are possible and that will begin to make a difference.
Now, Prof, it's always good to talk to you, and thank you very much for your time. Professor Mark Tomlinson, co-director of the Institute for Life Course Research at Stellenbosch University, written a wonderful analysis and opinion piece. You can go find it online. Just Google analysis, the burden of climate change lies with our children. It's a very, very in-depth article, fascinating to read, very scary to read as well, if we don't start doing something now.